44 years ago, a 19-year-old woman disappeared after entering Stanford Memorial Church alone late at night. The following morning, she was found dead in a front pew near the altar. Her arms were crossed over her chest, her legs were spread apart, and an altar candle had been placed between her breasts. The disturbing scene immediately sparked theories involving satanic cults, ritual killings, and occult ceremonies. Yet, despite decades of investigation, none of those theories ever led to an arrest. While investigators searched for answers, the killer remained a familiar face at the church. He was questioned during the first hours of the investigation, but was never charged. In the years that followed, he continued working at the church and living openly in the community while the case remained unsolved. Then, in 2016, advances in DNA testing revealed what investigators had been unable to prove in 1974. A DNA profile recovered from the jeans she was wearing on the night of her murder pointed to a man who had been connected to the case from the very beginning. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you like videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In the fall of 1974, Stanford University was one of the most prestigious campuses in America. Thousands of students had arrived in Northern California to begin a new academic year. The Vietnam War was winding down, the Watergate scandal had recently shaken the nation, and for many young Americans the future seemed full of opportunity. Among them were Bruce and Arlis Perry, newlyweds who had recently moved from North Dakota after Bruce was accepted into Stanford's pre-med program. Arlis was 19 years old. Raised in a deeply religious Christian family, she was known as a kind, trusting young woman whose faith played a major role in her life. While Bruce spent most of his time studying and working, Arlis struggled with loneliness and homesickness. Having never lived outside North Dakota, she found it difficult to adjust to life in California. She often visited Stanford Memorial Church, a place that reminded her of home and gave her a sense of comfort. By October 1974, things finally seemed to be improving. Arlis had recently found a job, was beginning to make friends, and had written home that she felt everything was finally falling into place. On the evening of October 12, 1974, the Stanford campus was active. It was a holiday weekend, and music from various parties could be heard from the main quad. It was a cool evening, and Arlis had letters she wanted to mail to North Dakota. At around 11:30 p.m., Bruce decided to walk with her to the mailbox so they could spend time together. During the walk, the two got into a minor argument about who had put air into one of the tires on their car. Arlis told Bruce she wanted to go to the church to cool down and have some time to herself. Bruce headed back to their apartment, which was about half a mile away. When Arlis still had not returned by midnight, Bruce began to worry. He decided to head to the church to check on her, but when he arrived, all of the doors were locked. He then searched the campus, but there were few places Arlis would have gone. She was still struggling to make friends and was not the type of person to join one of the various parties happening that night. After checking their route home in the hopes of running into her, Bruce returned to the apartment to wait. He remained there until 3 a.m. when he finally called the police to report her missing. He told the dispatchers that he thought she might have fallen asleep inside the church and had been accidentally locked in. 2 police dispatchers were sent to the church. When they arrived, they found all the doors were locked and no one responded when they called out. Finding nothing suspicious, they assumed Bruce and Arlis were having a domestic dispute and that she would eventually return home. At 5:45 a.m., Stephen Crawford, the night watch security guard responsible for locking and opening the church each day, returned to Stanford Memorial Church to open it for the morning. He discovered that one of the doors was already unlocked. Police would later find that this door had been forced open from the inside. When Crawford entered, he found Arlis's body on the left side of the altar in the front pews, where she had last been seen praying. She was naked from the waist down, and the jeans she had been wearing were draped across her lower body. An ice pick was found jutting out from behind her left ear, though the handle of the tool was missing and was never recovered. Though a small bone in her neck had been broken, the medical examiner determined the ice pick was the cause of death. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and her legs were spread open. She had been sexually assaulted with a meter-long altar candle that was still inside her body. Her blouse had been ripped open, and a second altar candle was pressed between her breasts, with her arms positioned over it. Markings on her body indicated she had been beaten and strangled, though there were no obvious signs of a struggle near her body. Investigators found a kneeling pillow nearby that contained semen, and a latent palm print was discovered on one of the candles. Immediately after the discovery, investigators went to the apartment to inform Bruce and to question him. In most murder investigations, those closest to the victim are considered primary suspects, and since the couple had only moved to California weeks earlier, Bruce was the only person Arlis knew well. When police arrived, they were met at the door by Bruce, who was covered in blood. Bruce explained that he suffered from chronic nosebleeds whenever he became severely stressed. Investigators did not immediately tell Bruce that Arlis had been murdered. Instead, they asked him to come to the station to answer questions and officially file a missing persons report. Once there, they questioned him for 2 hours, presenting various scenarios, including the possibility that Arlis was cheating or that she was pregnant and he was unhappy about it. Bruce became angry at these suggestions but remained cooperative. He voluntarily provided his fingerprints and took a polygraph test. At the time, polygraph results were often treated as highly reliable evidence by law enforcement. Bruce passed the test, and police ruled him out as a suspect. It was only then that they informed him his wife had been killed. Upon hearing the news, Bruce completely broke down. The stress triggered another severe nosebleed, this time so intense that officers had to provide first aid at the station before continuing the interview. With Bruce ruled out as a suspect, investigators turned their attention to reconstructing Arlis's final movements and identifying everyone who had been at the church that night. One of the people they interviewed was Stephen Crawford, the night watch security guard responsible for locking Stanford Memorial Church. Crawford told detectives that he had seen Arlis enter the church at approximately 11:50 p.m. 2 other silent worshippers were present in the church at the time. They saw her enter, walk to the front pews on the left-hand side of the altar, and kneel to pray. According to these witnesses, she was still in prayer when they left at midnight. The church was scheduled to close at midnight, but Crawford was running behind schedule that evening. He arrived to lock up at approximately 12:10 a.m. He looked inside, did not see anyone, and called out that it was time for anyone remaining to leave. Hearing no response, he locked the church doors between 12:15 and 12:30 a.m. As investigators continued processing the crime scene and interviewing witnesses throughout the morning, news of the murder quickly spread across the Stanford campus. Despite the shocking discovery, the Sunday service at Stanford Memorial Church proceeded as scheduled. However, the congregation, which included journalists and grieving students, was moved to the front lawn so the interior of the church could remain a preserved crime scene. Reverend Robert Hamerton Kelly, the dean of the chapel, had seen the crime scene before the service. He stated publicly that he believed the murder was symbolic and resembled a satanic ritual. However, investigators focused on a different possibility. Based on the condition of the body and the way the scene had been staged, they believed the evidence pointed more toward a sexually motivated attack than an organized occult ceremony. The positioning of Arlis's body and the use of the altar candles suggested an attempt to shock, humiliate, and psychologically disturb whoever eventually discovered the crime scene. As more witness statements were collected, investigators began comparing different accounts from that night. Bruce maintained that nothing had seemed suspicious during their walk. However, a passerby who had been near the church around midnight reported seeing a man with sandy blonde hair parted to the side entering the building. This man was described as being around 25 years old with a medium, stocky build. The FBI developed a profile of the killer, suggesting he was likely a loner with a military background, aged between 17 and 22, who likely kept a diary and trophies from his crimes. Investigators determined that Arlis had been murdered around midnight, but that the sexual assault with the candles had occurred after her death. This led to the theory that when Crawford arrived at 12:10 a.m. to lock up, the killer was still inside and had likely forced Arlis to remain quiet at that time. The theory was supported by another witness who passed the church between 12:15 and 12:30 a.m. and reported hearing a strange sound coming from inside, though they assumed they had imagined it. That theory raised an important question. If the killer had remained inside the church after the murder, how had he escaped? According to Crawford, he conducted a security sweep of the building at approximately 2 a.m. Police officers also checked the exterior of the church around 3 a.m. In both instances, the doors were reported to be locked. One possibility was that the killer stayed with the body for several hours, successfully hiding during Crawford's sweep before later escaping through a side door. Another possibility was that Crawford had not been completely truthful about what had happened that night. Because of his access to the building, Crawford was considered a suspect. However, he passed a polygraph test, and his palm print did not match the print found on the candle. Reverend Hamerton Kelly was also questioned because he had keys to the church. He too passed a polygraph test, and his handprint was not a match. Police eventually compared the palm print found on the candle against more than 100 suspects without finding a match. Of the 7 people known to have visited the church the night of the murder, 6 were identified and ruled out. The only person investigators could not identify was the man with the sandy blonde hair. On October 15, 1974, a memorial service for Arlis was held at the Stanford Memorial Church. Bruce and his family sat only meters away from the location where her body had been found just days earlier. Among the attendees was one of Arlis's co-workers from the law firm where she had recently started working. Arlis had only been at the firm for 2 weeks and, wanting to establish herself as a professional, had not yet had Bruce visit her at the office. Consequently, the co-worker did not know what Bruce looked like until the memorial. At the service, the co-worker realized that a man who had visited Arlis at work the day before her murder was not Bruce. The visitor was described as a man in his early 20s with sandy blonde hair, standing approximately 5 feet 10 inches with an athletic build. The two had spoken for about 15 minutes in a conversation that appeared serious, and Arlis seemed visibly upset afterward. Despite the similarity between this description and the man seen entering the church on the night of the murder, there was very little investigative follow-up on the lead. When questioned, Bruce stated he had no knowledge of the visitor or why Arlis would have been upset. On October 18th, Arlis's body was returned to North Dakota for a second memorial service at the Bismarck Reformed Church, the same location where she and Bruce had married 2 months prior. She was buried in a local cemetery. Less than 2 weeks later, her temporary grave marker was stolen. It was the only marker in the entire cemetery that was taken. This event fueled local rumors that the killer might be from Bismarck and had followed Arlis to California before returning to North Dakota. Bruce's parents, Donna and Duncan Perry, contributed to these theories by claiming that while Bruce and Arlis were in a long-distance relationship, Arlis and a friend had visited Mandan, a town neighboring Bismarck. The Perrys alleged that Arlis had been attempting to convert members of a local satanic cult to Christianity. The claim gained traction among some supporters of the theory because Arlis had previously volunteered with Christian youth organizations such as Young Life and was known for openly sharing her faith with others. To those who believed the cult theory, it was not difficult to imagine that her attempts to spread Christianity could have created friction with individuals who held opposing beliefs. The group in question was identified as the Process Church of the Final Judgment, an organization that had long attracted controversy because of its alleged connections to both Scientology and satanic imagery. The timing also helped fuel the rumors. During the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, America experienced a growing cultural fear, commonly referred to as the Satanic Panic. The 1978 Jonestown mass murder-suicide, which left more than 900 people dead, intensified public concern about cults and fringe religious movements. Stories about hidden organizations, ritual murders, and satanic groups spread through churches, television programs, and tabloid media across the country. Against that backdrop, many people believed Arlis's murder fit perfectly into those fears. She had been killed inside a church. The crime scene appeared highly symbolic, and rumors already existed that she had encountered members of a controversial cult before moving to California. While investigators largely dismissed the theory because Arlis's involvement with the group could not be confirmed and the murder lacked definitive ritualistic markers, the rumors persisted. In 1987, 13 years after the crime, author Maury Terry published The Ultimate Evil, a book that reignited interest in the cult theory. Terry criticized the initial investigation for dismissing the links between Arlis and the Process Church. He claimed the man Arlis had argued with at the law firm was a cult member who had followed her to California. He also highlighted a series of caves located behind Bismarck State College, which he alleged were used by the cult for rituals. Following the book's release, an influx of curious locals visited the caves, leading authorities to close them off. Terry's book also focused on David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam killer who terrorized New York City in the mid-1970s. In 1978, 4 years after Arlis's death, Berkowitz sent a letter to North Dakota authorities claiming that the Process Church of the Final Judgment had hired a hitman to kill Arlis after her attempts to convert them. He alleged that the cult operated nationwide and that he was a member. In October 1979, Berkowitz sent a book about Satanism to a North Dakota officer with a handwritten note that read, "Arlis Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain. Followed to California, Stanford University." 2 detectives from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office traveled to New York to interview Berkowitz, but he ended the meeting after 30 minutes, claiming he feared being labeled a snitch in prison. Investigators eventually concluded that Berkowitz was seeking publicity and had no genuine connection to the case. The murder was also occasionally linked to the deaths of Leslie Perlov and Janet Taylor, 2 other women murdered in the Stanford area around the same time. While witnesses in both the Perry and Perlov cases reported seeing a blond man near the scenes, the methods of the crimes differed significantly. Perlov and Taylor were strangled with their own clothing or by hand in isolated areas, whereas Arlis was killed with a weapon in a high-risk location where a security guard and other pedestrians were nearby. Ted Bundy was also considered a potential suspect, as he had committed several murders on college campuses and was known to visit California during 1973 and 1974. However, investigators ruled him out after confirming he had an airtight alibi for the night of October 12th. In 2011, a new lead emerged when a man named Brian McCracken contacted authorities. He claimed that around midnight on the night of the murder, he had walked past the Stanford Memorial Church and heard flute music. Upon entering, he reportedly saw a young, thin man in a light-colored afro wig playing a flute near a naked woman lying on the altar. McCracken stated he assumed it was some kind of performance or game and did not realize the significance of what he had seen until years later. Detectives eventually tracked down the man McCracken identified as the flutist. During an interview conducted under the pretext of discussing his music career, the man mentioned owning a blonde afro wig. However, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office later stated that the man was not considered a person of interest in the murder. As DNA testing technology advanced throughout the years, investigators routinely returned to the physical evidence from the case. In 2016, they finally achieved a breakthrough when they located the DNA profile of an unknown male on the jeans Arlis had been wearing on the night of her murder. Over the next 2 years, investigators systematically re-interviewed everyone who had been in the vicinity of the church that night and collected DNA samples from each individual. One by one, they eliminated every person except the former Night Watch security guard, Stephen Crawford. By this time, Crawford was 72 years old and in poor health. He was a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and had begun working for Stanford in 1971 within the Department of Public Safety. He had served as a police officer for 1 year before a new police chief reorganized the department, forcing 75% of the officers out of their roles and offering them positions as security guards instead. Crawford was one of the officers affected by this change. He resented the university for the demotion and eventually left in 1976 to work security elsewhere. His prior law enforcement experience may also have helped him avoid suspicion for decades. Crawford understood police procedures, knew how investigations operated, and appeared calm and cooperative during questioning in 1974. In 1992, Crawford faced legal trouble when his ex-wife reported him for forging a fake diploma using a blank certificate he had stolen from Stanford. When police searched his home, they discovered he had stolen over 300 valuable items from the university, including books dating back to the 16th century. The stolen items were valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars, making the theft a felony. Despite the scale of the crime, Crawford was sentenced to only a 6-month suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. In 1993, he moved to San Jose, California, where he lived in apartment 185 on the first floor of the Del Coronado apartment complex near Highway 85. He lived a quiet life working as an insurance adjuster and had no further run-ins with the law. Crawford had never been officially ruled out as a suspect. Although his palm print did not match the one on the candle and he had passed a polygraph test in 1974, detectives remained suspicious of him but lacked the evidence to make an arrest. In 2018, however, they compared his DNA to the sample found on Arlis's jeans. It was a match. The location of the DNA evidence made the breakthrough especially significant. Investigators stated the sample had been recovered from an intimate area of Arlis's clothing, making innocent contact extremely unlikely. After more than 4 decades, detectives finally had the physical evidence they had lacked in 1974. On the morning of Thursday, June 28, 2018, detectives arrived at Crawford's apartment at 9:05 a.m. When they knocked on the door, Crawford called out, telling them to give him a minute because he was getting dressed. Several minutes passed, and the detectives grew suspicious of the delay. They used a master key provided by the building manager to let themselves in. When they entered the apartment, they found Crawford sitting on the bed holding a handgun. The detectives immediately backed away and retreated from the room. Moments later, they heard a single gunshot. When they re-entered the apartment, they found Crawford lying on the floor with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. At the age of 74, Crawford had committed suicide before he could be taken into custody or face trial. When investigators searched his apartment, they found a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, on his desk, indicating he had been following the public theories regarding the case. To investigators, the discovery was deeply unsettling. It suggested Crawford had spent years following the public theories surrounding the murder, while knowing he himself had remained hidden from suspicion. For decades, the case had drifted through rumors of cults and serial killers, while the actual suspect quietly lived nearby in San Jose. They also discovered a handwritten suicide note that had been written 2 years earlier, around the time detectives had started reinvestigating him. The note was scribbled and difficult to read, but it contained no mention of Arlis Perry. The resolution of the case came just 3.5 months after Arlis's father, Marvin, had passed away. He died without ever knowing the identity of his daughter's killer. Arlis's mother, Jean, was 88 years old at the time of the breakthrough. She expressed her heartbreak that her husband had not lived to see the closure he had spent decades trying to find. For more than 4 decades, investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths searched for answers. Theories involving satanic cults, ritual murders, and secret organizations dominated discussions about the case. Yet, in the end, the truth turned out to be far less mysterious and far more unsettling. The man responsible had been connected to the church from the very beginning. He had been questioned, investigated, and ultimately overlooked. It wasn't a cult, a conspiracy, or a nationwide network. It was one individual who managed to hide in plain sight for more than 40 years. Arlis Perry's case is a reminder that while rumors and theories can capture public attention, evidence is what ultimately solves crimes. And sometimes the answer isn't found by looking farther away, but by taking a second look at what was there all along. If you found this case interesting, leave a comment and let us know what you think was the biggest reason it remained unsolved for so many years. Was it the limitations of forensic technology, the focus on cult theories, or something else entirely? And as always, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy true crime documentaries like this one, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future cases.